Cleaning woman saves billionaire from prison. What happened next will restore your faith in love. A letter forgotten on a mahogany table. A cleaning lady working alone at midnight. A billion-dollar conspiracy about to explode. What Evelyn Torres discovered that night should have been unseen by anyone, especially someone the world considers invisible. But sometimes being invisible is the greatest superpower of all, because while the powerful plotted one man's destruction, they forgot that someone was watching. Someone who was about to become the most dangerous piece on the chessboard, and someone who would steal a billionaire's heart in the process. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how a minimum-wage cleaning lady uncovered a billion-dollar conspiracy, why the most powerful man in Chicago fell in love with someone society considered worthless, and how this impossible romance proved that love truly can move mountains, even when those mountains are made of money, power, and corruption. But first, let me tell you about the night fate put on a janitor's uniform. Evelyn Torres was 29 years old and had already endured more real hardship than most people face in a lifetime. Every night, promptly at 10 p.m., she entered the Millennium Corporate Tower with her badge, and her world was reduced to floors that needed scrubbing, trash that needed emptying, and offices that needed cleaning. Her uniform was simple: dark pants, a company polo shirt, and shoes that prioritized comfort over style, as she was on her feet for 8 hours straight. But here's what the executives in their $1,000 suits never knew about Evelyn Torres. She had a bachelor's degree in accounting she'd never been able to use, student loans that ate up 40% of her salary, a photographic memory that catalogued every conversation she'd overheard, every document she'd glimpsed, every pattern she'd noticed in 3 years of unseen observation. The most important thing is that she had a reason that made every sacrifice worth it. Evelyn's 22-year-old sister, Maria Torres, suffered from a rare autoimmune disease that required treatments costing more than most people's annual salary. The health insurance that came with Evelyn's job as a cleaning lady wasn't just a benefit, it was Maria's lifeline. Every night Evelyn walked the halls of the company, she carried Maria's photo in her pocket, a reminder of why being invisible was a small price to pay to keep her sister alive. What Evelyn didn't realize was that her world was about to collide with that of someone who lived in a universe of private jets, penthouse apartments, and power that most people couldn't even comprehend. Richard Hale ran his empire from the 42nd floor of the Millennium Corporate Tower, behind a desk that cost more than most people's annual salary. By 53, he had built a fortune through real estate development and technology investments, his name synonymous with success and ruthlessness in Chicago business circles. Richard was the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits like armor and spoke in numbers most people couldn't even fathom. But here's what Fortune magazine articles and society pages never revealed about Richard Hale. Success had cost him everything that truly mattered. His marriage had crumbled under the weight of 16-hour workdays and missed birthdays. His 2 children, David and Sarah, spoke to him through lawyers and Christmas cards signed by assistants. The recognition he had craved all his life felt hollow now, like applause echoing in an empty theater. Every night, as the city glittered beneath the windows of his penthouse, Richard wondered if this was what victory was supposed to feel like. The answer, though he would never admit it, was a resounding no. His daily routine was meticulously structured: a 6 a.m. workout with a personal trainer, breakfast meetings that began at 7:30 a.m., back-to-back conferences until 8 p.m., and then often working alone in his office until well after midnight. It was during these early morning hours, when the building was silent except for the hum of cleaning equipment, that Richard felt most isolated from the world he had conquered. What he never imagined was that salvation would come in the form of someone he had never actually seen, despite having met her in the hallways for 3 years. The contrast between their worlds wasn't just a matter of money, it was a matter of visibility, importance, of being seen as a complete human being. Richard's every move was documented in business journals and society pages. Evelyn had perfected the art of being a ghost, moving through the corporate tower like a benevolent spirit, cleaning up the mess left by people who never bothered to learn her name. But ghosts, as Richard was about to discover, sometimes have the power to save souls. The night that changed everything began like any other, with the soft hum of vacuum cleaners and the distant glow of city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Evelyn had no idea that her mundane Tuesday night was about to become the most significant night of her life. As she approached Richard's office, the sanctuary of the corporate cathedral, something immediately caught her eye. In 3 years of cleaning that office, she'd never seen Richard leave anything personal behind. The space was always immaculate, impersonal, like a blockbuster museum exhibit, rather than a place where a human being actually worked. But that night, there was an envelope on the table. It wasn't just any envelope. This one was cream-colored, expensive-looking, slightly warped on its otherwise perfect mahogany surface. It was sealed with real wax, not the corporate security seals she was used to seeing, but an old-fashioned wax seal that suggested something deeply personal. The envelope seemed to pulse with meaning, drawing his attention like a magnet. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, cleaning supplies in hand, staring at that innocent-looking piece of paper that would either save a man's empire or destroy it utterly. She had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible, of seeing without being seen. But that night, she felt the stirrings of something she had almost forgotten existed within her. Curiosity, autonomy, the desire to be important in a story that had always cast her as an extra. Have you ever been on the edge of someone else's private world? That's exactly where Evelyn found herself, staring at that envelope that represented a crack in Richard Hale's perfectly constructed facade. The weight of the moment weighed heavily on Evelyn's shoulders as she stood there, a cleaning cloth in one hand, the other hovering uncertainly over the envelope. She had spent years being silenced by others, and by her own fears, by her own acceptance of limitations. But there in that office, surrounded by monuments of power and privilege, she understood something fundamental. Every great change in history began with someone who was ignored, someone who chose courage over comfort. The decision, when made, surprised her with its simplicity. With steady hands, Evelyn reached for the envelope. As she unfolded the letter, her eyes quickly scanned the contents, and with each line she read, her world shifted. This wasn't just a personal note. It was a confession, a revelation, a map to secrets that could destroy careers and topple empires. What she discovered would make her question everything she thought she knew about power, justice, and love. The letter in Evelyn's trembling hands began with words that immediately shattered any assumptions she might have had about Richard Hale's character. My dear Margaret, I know I have no right to write to you after all these years of silence, but my conscience no longer allows me to carry these secrets alone. The success everyone celebrates, the empire that bears the Hale name, all of this was built on a foundation of choices that have haunted me every day for the past 23 years. Margaret, his sister, separated for over 2 decades. As Evelyn read deeper, the carefully constructed facade of the ruthless businessman crumbled, revealing something far more complex and human than she had ever imagined possible. Richard wrote about falsified environmental impact reports that allowed toxic developments near schools, bribes paid to city officials who expedited permitting while ignoring safety concerns, rigged bidding processes that cheated honest bidders out of millions, destroying family businesses that had operated for generations. But more shocking than the commercial revelations was the tone of the letter. Richard wasn't bragging or justifying these actions. He confessed them with the desperate voice of a man who had finally recognized the true cost of his success. He wrote about choosing a crucial merger meeting over being present at his father's deathbed, leaving Margaret alone to hold her dying mother's hand in her final moments. About missing David's high school graduation for a ribbon-cutting ceremony that made the cover of the business section. I told myself I was building something important, something that would support our family for generations. But what good is an empire if you destroy your soul to build it? What good is success if it costs everyone you love? Personal revelations run deeper than any corporate scandal. Margaret tried to reach out to her over the years. Richard revealed. She sent wedding invitations, birth announcements, Christmas cards, trying to fill the void created by their father's death. But Richard's pride, his inability to admit his choices were wrong, prevented him from responding. He convinced himself his sister would be better off without him, that his toxic ambition would only poison any happiness she had found. But the most devastating revelation came in the final pages of the letter. Richard detailed a conversation he had overheard between his closest associates and the legal team just days earlier. Marcus Webb, his partner of 15 years, the man who had been best man at his wedding, godfather to his children, someone he considered closer than a brother. Patricia Chen, his legal advisor who had helped him navigate the murky waters of corporate law for over a decade. They weren't just planning to betray him, they were orchestrating the perfect setup. Besides, they've been planning this for months, maybe years, Margaret, creating a paper trail that makes me look like the sole architect of all our illegal activities, while they position themselves as unwitting accomplices. They've documented every decision, every questionable choice, making it appear as if I made them unilaterally, without consulting or consenting to anyone. The methodology was incredibly sophisticated. Gradually, they excluded Richard from certain meetings, continuing to implement decisions on his behalf. They created email chains that made it appear as if he had given orders he never actually did. They prepared depositions from employees who had been trained to testify that Richard acted as a lone wolf, trusting no one and sharing no power with anyone. The beautiful irony, from their perspective, is that my reputation for ruthlessness actually works in their favor. When all this comes to light, no one will question whether I was capable of orchestrating the entire operation single-handedly. They've turned my greatest professional asset into my greatest personal liability. But then came the promise that made Evelyn's heart race. Margaret, I will fix this regardless of the personal cost. I've been gathering evidence for weeks, recordings, documents, financial records that prove the collective nature of our crimes and the calculated nature of their betrayal. It's all hidden in the safe behind the Monet in my office. If something happens to me before I can act, if their timeline accelerates faster than my preparation, know that I've finally found the courage to choose love over power, truth over profit. The letter ended with words that broke Evelyn's heart. I wasted 23 years being too proud to apologize, too afraid to admit I was wrong, too convinced that success could somehow justify the cost. But if I've learned anything from this betrayal, it's that the people who truly matter, family, true friends, people with genuine hearts, are worth more than all the empires in the world. I should have chosen you, Margaret. I should have chosen love. I hope it's not too late to start. Standing there with the letter trembling in her hands, Evelyn realized that her life had been divided into two distinct chapters. Before reading those words, and after, she was now the keeper of secrets that could change the course of history, armed with knowledge that made her incredibly powerful and vulnerable. But more than that, she had just seen beyond the facade of a man she had considered callous, discovering someone capable of both terrible choices and profound remorse, someone who was about to fall into a trap that would destroy not only his career, but his chance at redemption. Evelyn, isn't it? The voice made her freeze completely. In 3 years of cleaning this building, Richard Hale had never spoken directly to her. But there he was, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk almost midnight, watching her with eyes that expressed something she'd never seen in him before, genuine recognition. Not recognition of her as a service provider, but as a complete human being. I know it's late, Richard continued, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it in the hallways or conference rooms. But would you mind if I asked you something? The letter was still in Evelyn's hands, though she'd quickly folded it and held it against her cleaning supplies. The question hung in the air between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. The letter had created an intimacy between them that transcended their social roles, and she could feel that connection pulling her like gravity. "You're very late tonight, Mr. Hale," she managed, her voice firmer than she expected. "Is everything all right?" They both understood that she was offering him something rare in their world, genuine concern from someone who expected nothing in return. Richard's laugh was bitter and uncertain, the sound of a man who had just realized how long it had been since anyone had asked about his well-being without ulterior motives. "You know what's funny, Evelyn? I have hundreds of employees, dozens of business partners, and contacts in every major city in the world. but I can't think of a single person I could honestly answer that question to. The vulnerability in her admission caused something to shift inside Evelyn's chest. She found herself putting down her cleaning supplies and approaching his desk, not like an employee approaching her boss, but like a human being drawn to the pain of others. "This feels lonely," she said simply. "It really is," Richard replied, and the honesty in those two words held more truth than most of his business presentations combined. "I used to tell myself that loneliness was the price of success, that if I could just accomplish enough, build enough, accumulate enough power, the emptiness would disappear. But it doesn't, does it? It just gets quieter. Like a background noise you learn to ignore until suddenly, in moments like this, it becomes deafening." Evelyn felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. This wasn't the cold, calculating businessman she'd observed for 3 years. He was someone caught in the same web of social expectations that shaped her own life, only on the other side of the economic spectrum. While society expected her to be invisible and grateful, it expected him to be ruthless and successful, never showing weakness, always rising, no matter who stood in his way. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the choices I've made," Richard continued, his voice growing contemplative. "The people I've hurt, the bridges I've burned, the boundaries I've crossed because I told myself they were necessary for success. Have you ever wondered what your life would be like if you'd made different choices?" The question was more personal than anything any boss had ever asked her. "Every day," Evelyn admitted. "But I've learned that dwelling on different choices can drive you crazy if you let it. Sometimes the only choice that matters is the next one you make." Richard looked at her in surprise, as if expecting a polite response rather than genuine wisdom. "You're not what I expected, Evelyn Torres." "What did you expect?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'm ashamed to admit I never thought of you as a complete person before tonight. I saw your function, not your humanity. That says something terrible about me, doesn't it?" The admission hung between them, raw and honest. "I think most people see what they need to see to get through the day," Evelyn replied cautiously. "That doesn't make them terrible, it makes them human." "You're so kind to say that, but we both know it's more than that. I spent years treating people like chess pieces instead of human beings, moving them around to suit my purposes, without regard for their dreams, their fears, their families waiting for them back home." Richard's eyes met hers, and Evelyn felt something electric pass between them. "You have a family waiting for you, don't you? Someone who depends on you." "My sister," Evelyn said softly. "Maria, she's been sick for years. The insurance from this job is what keeps her alive." The weight of that revelation seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. "And here I am, keeping you up late, talking about my problems when you have real responsibilities. I'm sorry, No," Evelyn interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Don't apologize for being human, Mr. Hale. Don't apologize for needing someone to listen to us. We all need that, regardless of how much money we have or what floor of the building we work on." Richard stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Richard," he said calmly. "Sorry. My name is Richard, not Mr. Hale, just Richard. And I want you to know something, Evelyn. In 3 years of working in this building, this is the most real conversation I've ever had with anyone, the most human I've ever felt. Thank you for that." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibilities and dangers, because they both realized something was happening, something neither of them expected. In a building designed to keep people in their assigned roles, in a society that demanded they remain in their separate worlds, two souls recognized each other across all the barriers that supposedly kept them apart, and that recognition was about to change everything. "I should let you get back to your work," Richard said finally, though his voice held reluctance. "And you should get some rest," Evelyn replied, but she didn't move to leave. "Evelyn? Try? Would you like to get coffee sometime, somewhere away from all this?" The question hung in the air between them, both impossible and inevitable. A coffee date between a billionaire CEO and a cleaning lady wasn't just unlikely, it was revolutionary. But when she looked into Richard's eyes, Evelyn saw something that transcended their economic differences, a genuine desire for connection with someone who saw beyond his facade. "I'd like that," she whispered. And in that moment, both worlds shifted on their axis. The following night brought revelations that made Evelyn's discovery of Richard's letter seem like a gentle prelude to a symphony of corruption far more complex and dangerous than she had initially imagined. While going about her usual cleaning routine, she noticed unusual activity on the 42nd floor. Conference rooms normally dark at that hour were ablaze with light, and she could hear the low murmur of urgent conversations behind closed doors. His instincts told him something significant was happening. The curiosity that had driven her to read Richard's letter now led her to linger near the main conference room, where she could make out several voices she recognized. Marcus Webb, Richard's longtime partner, spoke with the authoritative tone he typically reserved for hostile takeovers. Patricia Chen, the firm's chief legal counsel, delivered her words with clinical precision. The conversation was peppered with references to contingency plans, damage control, and acceptable losses, words that made Evelyn's blood run cold. These weren't the words of people trying to solve a problem. They were the words of people trying to escape the consequences while making sure someone else paid the price. Positioning herself where she could hear more clearly, but maintaining the appearance of being absorbed in her cleaning duties, the extent of the conspiracy began to reveal itself. Marcus explained how they had been preparing for months to isolate Richard from the company's decision-making process, creating a paper trail that would make him appear to be the sole architect of their collective crimes. "The best part of all," Marcus said with a satisfaction that made Evelyn shiver, "is that Richard's reputation for ruthlessness actually works in our favor. When all this comes to light, no one will question whether he was capable of orchestrating the entire operation alone." Patricia's response was even more frightening. "We've already placed documents in his personnel files that establish a pattern of unilateral decision-making in his most troubled businesses. When investigators dig deeper, they'll find a clear narrative. Richard Hale, the isolated megalomaniac who trusted no one and shared power with no one, finally went too far and was caught." The casual way she discussed the destruction of a man's life made Evelyn realize that these people saw human beings as nothing more than chess pieces to be sacrificed when convenient. But the conspiracy went far beyond Richard's personal destruction. They planned to use her downfall as a pretext for mass layoffs, including, as Patricia casually mentioned, a purge of the support staff to eliminate any potential witnesses who might have overheard sensitive conversations. Evelyn's job, her health insurance, Maria's lifeline, all of it was about to disappear as collateral damage in their calculated betrayal. "The timing is crucial," Marcus continued. "We need to begin the investigation before Richard has a chance to present his evidence. Our sources at the Federal Public Ministry can expedite the process, but we need to act within the next 48 hours. Standing there in the shadows of the corporate tower in Jewel, listening to these powerful people casually plot the destruction of lives and careers, Evelyn felt something crystallize inside her. The silenced voice that had lived inside her for years, the part of her that accepted invisibility as the price of safety, finally found courage. She couldn't let this happen. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Torres would step out of the shadows and into the light of consequences, no matter the cost. Because now it wasn't just about justice, it was about protecting someone she was falling in love with. The moral mathematics of Evelyn's situation seemed impossibly complex. Maria's rare autoimmune condition required treatments that cost more than most people's annual salary. The specialized medications alone cost $15,000 a month. Without the health insurance that came with Evelyn's job, Maria would be dead within 6 months. But as Evelyn thought of Richard sitting alone in his office, of the vulnerability in his voice when he invited her for coffee, of the conspiracy closing around him like a noose, something fundamental shifted inside her. She thought of their conversation the night before, the way he'd looked at her not as a service provider, but as a whole human being, the way his hand had briefly touched hers when he'd thanked her for listening, the way her heart had raced when he'd whispered her name as if it was something precious. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Torres was about to choose love over security. The decision terrified her. Every practical consideration advised against it. Every survival instinct screamed at her to remain invisible, keep her job, and protect Maria's insurance. But love, true love, demands courage that transcends self-preservation. And Evelyn had fallen in love with a man whose soul was worth saving, even if it cost her everything. The next 24 hours would determine whether his courage would be enough to overcome a conspiracy that had been years in the making. She began documenting everything. Using her cell phone camera, she photographed every document she could access, every email left open on the screens, every piece of evidence that corroborated Richard's version of events against the fabricated narrative being prepared against him. Her photographic memory, honed by years of accounting studies, helped her identify inconsistencies in financial records that demonstrated collective, not individual, decision-making. But photographs wouldn't be enough. She needed recordings. The next night, when the conspirators reconvened to finalize their plans, Evelyn was ready. Hidden microphones, purchased with the money she had saved for Maria's upcoming treatment, captured every detail of the plot. Marcus Webb's admission that they had been plotting Richard's downfall for over 2 years, Patricia Chen's confirmation that she had already prepared false statements from trained employees. Most damning of all was the discussion about his insurance policy. If Richard tries to present evidence, Marcus said with eerie calm, we have contingencies to completely discredit him. The cocaine we planted in his car last month, the forged documents suggesting embezzlement of pension funds, the witness statements we prepared alleging erratic behavior and substance abuse. This wasn't just corporate betrayal, it was defamation with criminal intent. Evelyn's hands trembled as she listened to them casually discuss the destruction not only of Richard's career, but also of his fundamental identity as a human being. These people planned to portray him as a drug-addicted fraudster who had stolen retirement funds from his own employees. But then Marcus said something that made her blood run cold. We also need to clean up the support staff. That cleaning lady, Torres, has been working on these floors for 3 years. She sees everything, hears everything. We can't risk her gathering information that could compromise our narrative. Patricia's response was clinical in its cruelty. We've already resolved this. The contract termination is scheduled for tomorrow morning, officially due to budget cuts. We've also flagged her sister's health plan for review. Apparently there were some irregularities in the original approval process. The insurer will likely cancel the policy within a week. They weren't just planning to fire her, they were planning to kill her sister. At that moment, Evelyn understood that this conspiracy wasn't just about money or corporate power. It was about people who viewed human life as expendable, who would sacrifice anyone to protect their own interests. That's when her love for Richard transformed from a personal emotion into a moral imperative. The trap was sprung on a Thursday morning with military precision and execution-like cruelty. Evelyn arrived for what she knew would be her last shift, to find the Millennium Corporate Tower bustling with activity she had never witnessed before. Federal agents, press corps lurking in the lobby, and employees clustered in worried groups throughout the building. The conspiracy she had heard was now unfolding in real time, and she felt physically sick as she watched Richard unknowingly walk into an ambush that would destroy not only his career, but his entire identity as a human being. Federal investigators from the SEC arrived promptly at 9 a.m., accompanied by FBI agents and a search warrant. But what made the scene particularly devastating was the media presence, clearly warned in advance by someone intent on ensuring maximum public humiliation. News cameras captured every moment as Richard was led through the lobby in handcuffs, his confident stride replaced by the staggering gait of a man whose world had just crumbled around him. Marcus Webb positioned himself near the elevators, giving an impromptu press conference that was a masterpiece of calculated betrayal. "Iasum, we are shocked and deeply disappointed by these allegations," he said with a perfect blend of sadness and righteous indignation. "Richard Hale was like a brother to us, a man we trusted with the reputation of our company. To learn that he may have acted outside the bounds of legal and ethical business practices is absolutely heartbreaking." His performance was so convincing that Evelyn realized some employees agreed. fully believing Richard's narrative as a rogue operator. We want to assure our clients, investors, and the public that this appears to be the isolated action of one individual who betrayed the trust we all placed in him, Marcus continued. The board will conduct a thorough review of all business practices, and we are committed to cooperating fully with federal investigators. But Evelyn knew the truth. She had heard them planning this destruction word for word, lie for lie. As she watched the man she loved be systematically destroyed by people he considered family, something hardened inside her. The invisible woman was about to become the most dangerous person in this carefully constructed world of lies, because she had something they never expected. Proof. And more than that, she had a love worth fighting for. That night, as Richard sat in a federal holding cell, contemplating the utter destruction of his life, Evelyn enacted a plan that would either save him or destroy them both. The recordings she had made, the photographs she had taken, the financial inconsistencies she had documented. All of it was compelling evidence, but she needed someone with authority to hear it. The problem was that no one in authority would take a cleaning lady seriously when she accused some of Chicago's most powerful business leaders of conspiracy. But Evelyn had learned something important from her years of invisibility. Sometimes the most effective way to be heard is to make the right person want to listen. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Patricia, of the FBI's white-collar crime division, had been mentioned in several news reports as the lead investigator on Richard's case. What the news didn't mention was that Agent Chen grew up in circumstances very similar to Evelyn's. After hours of research, Evelyn discovered that Sarah Chen had worked as a night janitor throughout college, supporting her immigrant parents and younger siblings. If anyone understood that the cleaning staff sees and hears everything, it would be Agent Chen. The meeting was arranged through a series of carefully worded messages that emphasized Evelyn's access to privileged information about the case. When they finally sat across from each other in a small FBI conference room, Agent Chen's first question was direct and challenging. Why should I believe that a billion-dollar conspiracy was uncovered by a cleaning lady? Because, Evelyn replied, cleaners are invisible, and invisible people witness things that powerful people never expect to be witnessed. Then she played the first recording. Agent Chen's expression changed within 30 seconds. By the time the first conversation ended, Marcus Webb casually discussing planted evidence and forged documents, Agent Chen was picking up the phone to call more agents. "How much more of this do you have?" she asked. 17 hours of recordings, over 300 photographs of documents, and a photographic memory that can recall every detail of the conversations I've overheard over the past 3 years, Evelyn replied. "And you're willing to testify about all of this in federal court?" "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to ensure the truth comes out," Evelyn said, "even if it destroys my life in the process." Agent Chen studied her for a long moment. "Do you understand that facing such powerful people, with so much money and influence, is incredibly dangerous? They will try to discredit you, destroy your reputation, and possibly even threaten your safety." "Agent Chen," Evelyn replied, "they've already planned to kill my sister by canceling her health insurance. They've already planned to destroy the man I love. What exactly do I have to lose by telling the truth?" The confrontation itself was orchestrated with the same precision that the conspirators used to destroy Richard. But this time, the tables were completely turned. Federal investigators, armed with the evidence and Evelyn's testimony, obtained arrest warrants for Marcus Webb, Patricia Chen, and 4 other senior executives. You should have seen Marcus Webb's face when federal agents interrupted his press conference about moving the company forward to handcuff him. The transformation from confident corporate leader to desperate criminal happened in seconds. The man who had spent days giving interviews about Richard's betrayal of trust now screamed about his own innocence as cameras captured every moment of his public downfall. Patricia Chen's arrest was equally dramatic. Agents raided her law office during a client meeting, seizing computers and files while her wealthy clients watched in horror. The woman who had coldly planned to frame an innocent man now suffered the same public humiliation she had orchestrated for Richard. But the real victory wasn't just the arrests. It was what happened when the evidence became public. The recordings Evelyn had captured were broadcast on every major news network. Marcus Webb's voice casually discussing planted cocaine and forged embezzlement documents. Patricia Chen's clinical discussion of destroying innocent lives for corporate gain. The callous references to housekeeping among support staff who might have witnessed his crimes. The United States heard the authentic voices of corporate predators plotting the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened their power. Richard's defense was thorough and compelling. Within 48 hours, he was released from federal custody with all charges dropped. The evidence against him was revealed to be part of an elaborate frame-up that took years to build and minutes to crumble under the weight of the truth. But the moment that changed everything, the moment that would be remembered long after the court case was over, happened on the courthouse steps. When Richard emerged from federal custody, he was surrounded by lawyers, reporters, and supporters who had gathered to testify in his defense. But his eyes sought only one person in the crowd. When he found Evelyn standing at the edge of the crowd, their eyes met amidst the chaos of cameras and shouted questions. Without saying anything to anyone, Richard went straight to her. "Evelyn Torres," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the noise of the crowd, "didn't just save my company, my reputation, or even my freedom. She saved my soul by showing me that true courage isn't in having power, it's in doing what's right, when you have everything to lose and nothing to gain." The crowd fell silent as one of Chicago's most powerful men publicly acknowledged a woman society had rendered invisible. She could have remained safe invisible, but she chose justice over safety. She chose truth over comfort. She chose... Richard paused, Watt looking directly into her eyes. She chose love over fear. Then he did something that made headlines around the world. Richard walked over to Evelyn, took her hands, and said words that would echo through corporate boardrooms and social media for years to come. "Evelyn Torres, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your world. It's about building a new world together, worthy of both of you. I know our worlds seem impossible to connect, but I've learned that impossible things become inevitable when they're built on truth and genuine love." The crowd held its breath as Richard fell to his knees on the courthouse steps. "I'm not asking you to fit into my world or to change who you are. I'm asking you to help me build a world where a billion-dollar empire can be governed with the same integrity, compassion, and strength you've shown throughout this ordeal. Evelyn Torres, will you marry me?" The moment stretched out like an eternity. Cameras flashed, reporters held their breath. The most powerful man in Chicago knelt before a woman the world considered worthless, offering not just his heart, but his complete transformation. Evelyn looked at Richard, seeing not the billionaire CEO, but the lonely man who had confessed his deepest regrets in a midnight office. The man who had invited her for coffee as if it were the most important invitation of his life. The man who had been willing to sacrifice everything for a chance at redemption. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes." Their kiss on the courthouse steps wasn't just romantic, it was revolutionary. Here was love transcending all the barriers society had built between them, wealth and poverty, power and invisibility, the executive suite and the janitor's closet. In that moment, they proved that love really can conquer all, even billion-dollar conspiracies and centuries of social conditioning. 6 months later, Richard and Evelyn's wedding was the most talked-about event in Chicago social circles, not because of its luxury, although the reception was beautiful, but because of what it represented. The guest list alone told a story of transformation. Maria Torres, now healthy thanks to cutting-edge treatment, was the maid of honor. David and Sarah Hale, Richard's children, came from opposite coasts to reconcile with their father and welcome their new stepmother. The most memorable moment occurred during Richard's speech. "A year ago, I thought I knew what success was," he said, raising his glass to the mixed crowd of billionaires and working-class families. "I thought it was about accumulation, domination, being feared instead of loved. But my wife taught me something no business school ever could. True success is not measured by what you build for yourself, but by how many people you help along the way." The changes in their individual lives were extraordinary. Richard's company became a model of corporate responsibility that other companies began to emulate. The first policy he implemented was a living wage for all employees, regardless of position. A health plan that covered not only employees but also their families. A profit-sharing plan that ensured that everyone who contributed to the company's success benefited. Evelyn's transformation was equally profound. The woman who spent years perfecting invisibility became one of the most sought-after speakers on corporate ethics and worker dignity. Universities invited her to lecture on moral courage. Congress summoned her to testify on corporate responsibility. Her memoir, And the Power of Being Seen, became a bestseller that inspired whistleblower protection laws. But the most beautiful change was how they changed each other. Richard learned that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in empowering them. His relationships with his children, which had previously been limited to mandatory holiday visits, blossomed into genuine friendships based on mutual respect and shared values. Evelyn discovered that being visible didn't mean losing her power. It meant using it more effectively. The qualities that made her a great observer, attention to detail, emotional intelligence, and an unwavering moral compass, made her an extraordinary business partner. Together, they built something neither of them could have achieved alone. The Marcus Webb trial became one of the most watched corporate corruption cases in American history. Evelyn's testimony, delivered with calmness and precision despite months of smear attempts, was devastating in its simplicity and power. She didn't speak like a lawyer or a business executive. She spoke like someone who bore witness to the truth and wasn't intimidated into denying it. "I was invisible to these people," she said from the witness stand, which meant they acted like themselves around me. No acting or no facade, just the honest expression of who they really were when they thought no one was looking. Marcus Webb received a 23-year federal prison sentence. Patricia Chen received 18 years. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. But most importantly, the case established legal precedents that protected working-class whistleblowers and strengthened corporate accountability laws. The real victory, however, was cultural. Richard and Evelyn's story became legendary because it proved something people desperately needed to believe: that love can indeed conquer all, even billion-dollar conspiracies and centuries of social conditioning. Their marriage sparked boardroom debates about the humanity of all workers. It inspired laws protecting the rights of service workers. It changed the way America thought about value, worth, and dignity in the workplace. But perhaps most importantly, it gave hope to millions of people who felt invisible, voiceless, and powerless. The Richard and Evelyn Hale Foundation, established on their first wedding anniversary, provides legal representation to workers who witness corporate misconduct. The foundation's motto, inscribed in marble in the lobby, captures the essence of their story. The most powerful voice in any room may be the one no one else hears. Their love story became proof that when courage meets love, miracles become inevitable. What if I told you that the story you just heard is more common than you might think, but with a generally different ending? The truth is, there are Evelyn Torres scattered throughout every major corporation in the United States right now. Invisible workers who see everything, know the secrets, understand the corruption, but remain silent because they believe their voices don't matter or because they fear the consequences of speaking out. But here's what makes this story different from all the others. Evelyn didn't just find her voice, she found her soulmate in the process. She proved that sometimes the most unlikely love stories are the ones that change the world. Her courage wasn't limited to exposing corruption. It was believing that love was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any consequence. Because when you choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and love over fear, miracles become inevitable. The next time you see someone society has rendered invisible, a janitor, a security guard, a food service worker, a maintenance worker, remember Evelyn Torres. Remember that the most powerful person in any environment may be the one no one else is paying attention to. And remember that love, real, transformative, life-changing love, often comes disguised as the most impossible thing in the world, until it becomes the most inevitable. Richard and Evelyn Hale remain married, transforming corporate culture and proving every day that love can indeed move mountains, even when those mountains are made of money, power, and prejudice. Their story continues to inspire because it reminds us that, in a world obsessed with artificial divisions, the most revolutionary act is simply to see the full humanity in another person. And sometimes, that recognition can literally save souls. In a universe that often seems designed to tear us apart, love remains the most powerful force uniting us. The invisible woman who saved a billionaire's soul didn't just change 2 lives. She changed what we believe is possible when love refuses to accept the limitations society tries to impose on it. This is perhaps the greatest love story of all. Tell me which city you watch us from and subscribe to the channel. We'll have many exciting stories here.